What if left and right aren't worldviews at all? What if they're just tribal uniforms?
That is the incredibly provocative question that really defines this entire deep dive. And it's honestly far more radical than it might sound at first.
It is. We are cracking open the groundbreaking work of Hyrum Lewis and Verlon Lewis in their book, The Myth of Left and Right, How the Political Spectrum Misleads and Harms America.
And, they're not just engaging in some polite academic debate here.
No, not at all. This is a full-scale assault on the very foundation of how we talk and even think about politics.
Right. They're suggesting that our basic misunderstanding of ideology, the lens we use for everything.
For every politician, every policy, every news story.
Exactly. That it's a massive and I think really overlooked contributor to the political dysfunction we see all around us, the toxic culture we're kind of swimming in today.
They raise the stakes immediately. They link this ideological blindness to really alarming real-world results.
Oh, absolutely. They point to events like the January 6th Capitol storming as, direct evidence of how destructive this framework has become.
His good versus evil frame.
That's it. And Lewis, they just come right out and say it. The political spectrum, this model we use every single day in every classroom, every news segment. It's the most influential political paradigm in 21st century America.
Yeah.
And it is completely wrong.
That's the core thesis, isn't it? The fundamental aha moment we're digging into today.
Yeah. They argue that these terms, left and right, they only refer to divergent tribes, social groups bound together by identity.
Not divergent worldviews, not some bedrock philosophy that logically connects all these different policy positions.
No, just tribes.
So our mission here is to peel back the layers of this illusion. We need to distinguish between what they call the essentialist myth.
Right, the idea that there's a fixed philosophical core defining each side.
And their social theory, which argues that ideology is purely a social thing. It's driven by group conformity or, like you said, tribal loyalty.
Let's start right there with the standard model, the essentialist myth, the one, we all learned in school.
Right. In that view, politics is a clash between two fixed worldviews, these two essences. It maps out so neatly on a single line.
It seems straightforward, doesn't it? The left means more government control of the economy, social permissiveness, foreign policy dovishness.
And the right means free markets, social restriction, and foreign policy hawkishness.
And in this model, it all feels so consistent. The positions are seen as flowing logically from a single essence. Maybe it's equality for the left or order for the right.
And if you take it to the extreme,
you get totalitarianism, fascism on the far right, communism on the far left. The model is comforting because it suggests there's this rational, moderate center.
But the Lewises just completely pull the rug out from under that foundational assumption. They ask, are these political positions naturally bound together by a single philosophy?
Right. And that's the critical pivot. They use the example of free markets and militarism. Why should a preference for, say, a minimal state role in the economy have a necessary relationship to wanting a massive interventionist military?
Philosophically, they're often in direct contradiction.
They absolutely are. A true limited government advocate should, by all rights, oppose massive military spending. But in American politics,
they're bundled together under the right banner.
And this is where they lean on political philosophers like Michael Oakeshott, who really challenged this whole idea that philosophy comes before political action.
Right, Oakeshott's famous line.
Ideology is the earthly stepchild of political activity. It's not the wise parent dictating what to do. It's the child invented after the fact to justify what the parent already did.
So the tribal identity comes first. The political action comes first. The philosophy is it's just the story we tell ourselves later to make it all sound coherent.
That's the social theory in a nutshell. Ideology is a social construct, not some philosophical constant.
And the second you try to apply this essentialist model to actual history, it just falls apart. They call it the problem of contradictory essences.
It really does, because the definition of the essence of a wing has to be so flexible that it becomes, useless.
Take the most common story for the right wing. Preservation, opposition to change, tradition. How on earth do you account for figures committed to the most radical transformation imaginable? Their starkest example is Adolf Hitler.
Universally placed on the extreme right.
Exactly, but Hitler was all about radical global transformation. Military conquest, genocide, total societal upheaval. If the essence of the right is don't change things, how is Hitler its most extreme example?
It's a devastating critique. And it's not just, these extreme figures.
No, look at something central to modern American conservatism. Capitalism.
Right. Capitalism, by its very nature, is a force of constant, even violent change, is what Schumpeter called creative destruction.
It's constantly destroying and recreating markets, jobs, whole social structures. The authors quote a historian describing capitalism as a force of relentless revolution.
So if the essence of the right is preservation and stability, calling this incredibly disruptive force right wing, well, you already have a massive contradiction baked right into the model.
So if the essence is so fragile, how does the model even survive? The authors say defenders use what they call the narrative fallacy.
This is where creative storytelling just completely takes over from any kind of analytical rigor. The narrative fallacy is this retroactive attempt to unify a random, often conflicting bundle of positions under some chosen philosophical theme.
And our brains love it. We want a coherent story.
We prefer coherence over chaos every time.
Let's walk through their example because it just perfectly shows how absurd this can get.
Okay, so you take 5 totally random political positions. Someone is pro-life, but also favors high taxes. They're tough on crime, but they also support gay marriage. And they oppose wealth redistribution.
A complete grab bag of positions.
A total grab bag. Now, you have to unify them under a random essence, let's say. Assertiveness.
Okay.
You can always weave a story. Assertive people stand up for the rights of the unborn and homosexual, so pro-life and pro-gay marriage. Assertive people aren't afraid to insert themselves into others' lives, so high taxes and tough laws, but they're self-reliant, so they're against redistribution.
And that story, it sounds just as coherent as the ones we hear every single day about what connects, say, a pro-life stance to a supply-side economic policy.
It does. And that's the point. The coherence is completely fabricated. It's the narrative imposing the unity, not any underlying philosophy. And Lewis argued this storytelling is just worthless as social science.
We mistake the sound of a good story for a real philosophical signal.
That's it. And beyond these philosophical holes, the model also just breaks down because modern politics is too complex. They call it the granularity problem.
We just have too many issues now.
Hundreds of them. You look at national politics today. Free speech, immigration, abortion, gun rights, climate change, religious liberty. It goes on and on.
And trying to lump every person into a vague category like socially conservative or socially liberal is just...
It's hopelessly simplistic because outside of the most hardcore party loyalists, those issues don't actually correlate naturally.
So give us a profile of someone who just instantly breaks the spectrum.
Okay, think of an individual who strongly favors gay marriage rights. That's a classic socially liberal position in the modern frame.
Right.
But this same person also wants heavily reinforced border enforcement and protectionist trade policies. Those are traditionally socially and economically conservative positions.
So is this person a left wing or a right wing?
The question is meaningless. The model requires those positions to correlate, but the Lewis and Lewis analysis finds that correlation only exists because of social conformity among the most politically engaged.
So for the general public?
For the general public, the correlation between, say, supporting abortion rights and supporting wealth redistribution is virtually zero. It's only among the political class, the people who've been highly socialized into this left-right framework, that you see the artificial correlation.
Which directly supports their theory. The tribe forced the issues together, not the philosophy.
Exactly.
It really is hard to imagine politics without these labels, but the historical truth is the American founders did not think this way. So if this framework isn't essential to governing, where on earth did it come from?
It's a completely arbitrary and purely European origin story. The political use of left and right is literally based on seating arrangements during the French Revolution.
A seating chart, a literal seating chart, determined the global political paradigm. That's astonishing.
It's purely geographic. Supporters of the revolution sat on the left side of the National Assembly. Opponents sat on the right. That's it.
It was just a neutral label for where you sat in the room.
Initially, yes. It had no philosophical depth whatsoever.
And meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America was arguing about federalism, republicanism, liberty.
Precisely. Pre-1900 Americans were Whigs, Federalists, Republicans, Democrats. They were debating institutional structures, the limits of state power. The founders did not think in spectrum terms.
And the authors are really forceful on this point. When modern historians label someone like Thomas Jefferson as left and Alexander Hamilton as right, they're committing a huge anachronism.
A gross anachronism. They're imposing a 20th century European framework onto 18th century American debates that just didn't use that language or that logic.
The fact that historians can even argue for decades about whether the progressives were left or right just proves the framework doesn't fit.
It's more evidence that the framework itself is failing to capture the complexity of the past. The labels are being forced onto these non-ideological debates.
Okay, so when did this arbitrary European seating metaphor finally make its way over to American political speech?
The importation phase really gets going in the early 20th century. The terms left-wing and right-wing start showing up in U.S. political speech around 1917.
And what was the context?
It was mostly journalists reporting on the radical factions in Russia. The Bolsheviks, they'd reference socialists of the left wing.
So wait, these terms weren't even originally used to describe Democrats and Republicans?
No, not at all. They were used to describe infighting among fringe European socialist groups. It was foreign terminology for foreign radicalism.
But it caught on.
It quickly became the dominant and what seemed like a very sophisticated framework for understanding our own two-party system. And this foreign framework then started to dictate the evolution of our domestic labels, like liberal and conservative.
Let's talk about that evolution, because the meanings of those words have done a complete 180 over the last century.
They really have. In the 19th century, liberal actually meant what we might today call libertarian. Limited government, individual liberty, free trade.
Like English liberals. And conservative.
Conservative often just meant moderate, cautious.
But then came the progressive shift around the turn of the century and the meaning of liberal just shame.
It flipped entirely.
It's a dramatic shift. Liberal started to embrace pro-government ideas. Higher taxes, more regulations, social welfare spending. It became synonymous with progressive. The philosophical bedrock of old liberalism, limited government, was just abandoned.
And the authors highlight how the old school liberals felt about this.
You can feel the frustration. Leading laissez-faire liberals at the time, like the editor of The Nation, E.L. Godkin, complained bitterly that these new self-proclaimed liberals were making common cause with the socialists.
They saw the new liberalism as the complete opposite of what the term originally meant.
And this is such a vital lesson for you, the listener, to grasp. It shows how ideological labels can literally evolve to mean the opposite of what they once did.
Which is pretty strong evidence against any kind of fixed essentialist meaning. It's the core of the social theory. While the policies and the philosophy completely flipped, the story those people told about themselves, the narrative remained constant. The people who now called themselves liberal still claim to represent progress or change.
They just used entirely different means to get there. Government expansion instead of government limitation.
That's it. The tribal identity and its self-justifying narrative survived, even when the actual policy is completely reversed.
So this narrative needed a stable home, and that seems to have happened with the rise of ideological parties in the 1930s, centered around one massive issue.
The New Deal. FDR's New Deal was the catalyst that crystallized everything. The Democratic Party became liberal and relatively left, supporting a huge expansion of government.
And the Republican Party naturally fell into the opposite role.
They became conservative and relatively right, opposing the New Deal's statism.
I remember the book mentioning that the opponents of the New Deal, the true liberals, didn't want the conservative label at first.
They resisted it. They preferred to call themselves individualists or true liberals, arguing that the New Dealers had betrayed the Jeffersonian idea of limited government.
So what changed?
It wasn't until the post-war years that intellectuals like Russell Kirk actively tried to give conservatism a venerable history. Kirk's famous plea for conservatives to stand athwart history yelling "stop" helped cement this idea that conservatism's essence was preservation.
So for a few decades, let's say from the 30s to the 60s, the spectrum actually seemed to work pretty well as a model for American politics.
It did, and that's the crucial caveat. In that era, the political spectrum was modeling a unidimensional reality. National politics was dominated by one single issue, The size of government. It was just more versus less. If someone said, should the party move to the left, everyone knew that meant expand the size of government.
And other issues like abortion or foreign policy.
They were peripheral. They were debated non-ideologically at the local level, or they just weren't dominant enough to break the model.
So the model worked only when reality was flat. But then after World War II, things got complicated. Multidimensionality shattered the model.
New issues popped up that didn't map neatly onto that size of government axis, and the spectrum became obsolete almost overnight. And that's when you see these massive shifts that reveal the tribalism underneath.
Let's start with the foreign policy flip. Before the New Deal, which party was the more interventionist or hawkish party?
Ironically, it was the Democrats. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, liberal Democrats, Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Harry Truman, were the more hawkish party.
Which actually fit the old model.
It did, because war meant a massive expansion of government power, so it aligned with their big government domestic agenda. Republicans were generally more isolationist.
But that completely reversed.
Completely. After the Korean War, and especially during Vietnam, the sides just flipped. Democrats became the anti-war party, and Republicans became the hawkish interventionist party.
And this shift wasn't driven by some deep philosophical change.
No, it was driven by tribal reactions to leadership and who was in power. The authors point out, when Bill Clinton launched military actions, liberals suddenly became more interventionist. When George W. Bush launched the Iraq War, conservatives became more interventionist. The position just follows the party leader.
The tribal signal overrides the supposed philosophical essence.
Every time. And you see the same pattern with social policy flips. Early progressives were often associated with policies that the modern right would embrace.
Or even policies that today we see as morally repugnant.
Absolutely. The left of the early 20th century, the progressives, were huge advocates for prohibition, extensive censorship, and tragically, even eugenics.
Things we would never associate with the modern left.
Not at all. Social issues only really got bound into this ideological spectrum after the Vietnam era, cementing the modern tribal coalition.
So the conclusion here is really potent. Once you have multiple unrelated political dimensions, foreign, social, economic, the original single-line spectrum just becomes obsolete.
Worse than obsolete. It becomes dangerously misleading. It forces everyone to perform this constant act of self-deception to justify tribalism.
The rationalizing writer.
That's it. People need a story to explain why they, as a Democrat, should suddenly support interventionism, or why they, as a Republican, should suddenly oppose free trade. The essentialist myth is the self-deception that keeps the party loyal. The tribe matters more than the principle.
This all leads directly to their core finding. Ideological identification is the cause, not the effect.
This is the revolutionary insight. The old myth says, I believe in free markets and tradition, therefore I am a conservative.
But the social theory says,
I anchored into the right-wing tribe because of my family or a single issue I care about, and then I adopted the whole bundle of beliefs that came with it. It's social conformism.
The growth of the religious right in the 70s is a perfect case study for this.
It is. Many religious Americans didn't really have a strong ideological identity until abortion became a national political issue. They anchored to the right-wing tribe over that one intensely personal moral issue.
And then what happened?
Then, as a matter of conformity, they adopted completely unrelated policies, like supply-side economics or a hawkish foreign policy. The tribal identity came first, and all the other beliefs followed, forced together by the tribal uniform.
And we can actually see the power of this tribal loyalty in modern political science experiments. Let's look at the proof, starting with what they call the Trump effect.
Political scientists Barber and Pope did this brilliant experiment. They took self-identified conservatives and presented them with a policy, like raising the minimum wage. If they told the conservatives that Donald Trump supported the policy, they would strongly agree with it. But, and this is the key, when they presented the exact same policy but said Trump opposed it,
they would strongly disagree.
Exactly. The actual content of the policy was irrelevant. The tribal signal was everything. It reveals, as the authors say, no commitment to an essential principle, only tribal solidarity.
And this isn't just limited to one figure or one party. The policy content override study is just as shocking.
Yeah, the psychologist G.L. Cohen found similar results with university students and welfare programs. Students would support really harsh putative welfare programs if their preferred party endorsed them.
And they'd support lavish ones if their party endorsed those instead.
Yes. The information about which party endorsed it literally overrode that of policy content.
So let me just make sure I have this straight. The substance of the policy, high taxes, low spending, whatever, was less important than the letterhead it was written on.
That is precisely the finding. The tribal signal from the in-group was the deciding factor, even if the policy contradicted the participants' own stated values.
This mechanism is so powerful, it can even overturn what we think of as deeply held moral beliefs, like the importance of a president's character.
It's pretty disturbing. The authors cite this Gallup study, the moral character flip. In 1999, Republicans generally said they prioritized a president who sets a good moral example. Democrats, meanwhile, prioritized a president who agreed with them politically.
And then, after the rise of a certain leader on the right whose character was questioned,
the positions completely reversed. The party that had prioritized character suddenly decided political agreement was more important, and the other party did the opposite.
And the timing makes it obvious.
It makes it clear it had nothing to do with some slow evolution of principle and everything to do with rationalizing the leader the tribe supported at that moment.
It gets even more meta when you realize that even the sophisticated academic tools designed to measure ideology are caught in this trap. Let's talk about the DW-NOMINATE critique.
DW-NOMINATE is this highly technical system used to map congressional votes on a spectrum. The fundamental flaw, according to Lewis and Lewis, is that it doesn't measure parties against some external fixed principle like limited government.
So what is it measuring?
It's defining left and right based on whatever the Democrats and Republicans happen to be doing at that moment. The result is a tautology. It's circular reasoning. It basically just measures party unity.
So give us the hypothetical example to make that clear.
Okay, imagine the Democrats suddenly decide to support a massive corporate tax cut. DW-NOMINATE would code that tax cut as left-wing.
Just because the Democrats supported it?
Just because they supported it. It's not measuring the policy content, it's measuring the tribal behavior. The argument becomes, the parties are ideologically extreme because they're doing whatever they're currently doing. It mistakes party unity for ideological principle.
And that mistake explains the extreme mutability of principles. We've seen core beliefs that defined a party for decades just vanish overnight.
Take foreign policy in Russia. For decades, the intellectual core of American conservatism was anti-Russian aggression. One historian even called it the glue of conservatism.
Right, going back to the Cold War.
And yet, coinciding exactly with the rise of Donald Trump, you saw a sudden, massive Republican reversal in views toward Russia. This shift was so sudden it proves it wasn't about principle, it was about tribal realignment.
The same thing happened with free trade.
A non-negotiable conservative principle for generations. But support for it dropped almost 50% between 2015 and 2017, perfectly aligning with Trump's protectionist stance. Being far right suddenly meant the opposite of what it meant 3 years earlier.
Which brings us back to this supposed central essence of the right, small government. What does the spending record of modern Republican presidents actually show?
The evidence is just damning for that framework. Under Presidents George W. Bush and Donald Trump, government size and debt grew far more than under many previous Democrats. Under Bush, government spending rose from 18% to 25% of GDP.
That's the biggest increase since
Franklin D. Roosevelt. So if the definition of the right is truly small government, then based purely on policy output, you'd have to argue that Bush and Trump moved the party
decisively and unambiguously to the extreme left.
But of course, no one says that. Because they held the conservative label, their massive government spending was also labeled conservative. The label's the constant, the policy is the variable.
The problem here isn't just academic confusion, it's the real civic danger that follows. When you're convinced your tribe represents some eternal principle, the authors argue, ideology becomes a humility killer.
When you believe your position is anchored in an eternal essence, you become dogmatic, you become rigid, you become ultimately impervious to evidence. Your mind switches from discovery mode to defense mode.
And this belief in essentialism allows for profound self-delusion.
It's that elephant and the rider analogy. The emotions are the powerful elephant of tribal loyalty. Reason is just the rider on top. We follow our party, the elephant, and then invent these elaborate philosophical stories after the fact to claim we're being rational.
And this leads to magnified confirmation bias, embracing what they call unjustified certainty.
And even denying empirical facts or, conjuring up false memories of your opponents doing evil things.
This essentialism then turns the spectrum into a weapon. They call it ideologism.
It's basically a new, socially acceptable form of bigotry. By labeling someone left or right, you can instantly use guilt by false association.
Right. If you call a moderate Democrat the left, you can immediately link them to Stalinism, even if all they want is market regulation.
And if you label a protectionist Republican as the right, you can link them to Nazism. It's a way to instantly delegitimize the other side.
My policy is just because it aligns with a timeless good. Your policy is evil because it aligns with a timeless evil.
And there's the core civic danger. When politics is framed as this Manichaean struggle, good versus evil, there is zero reason for pluralism or compromise. Why would you ever compromise with evil?
If you're fighting evil, you're justified in maximizing power by any means necessary.
Exactly. This worldview is what provides the rationale for phrases like, "I alone can fix it." It justifies discarding constitutional constraints and, as the authors suggest, it helps explain why people might support political violence. In their minds, they aren't stopping a party with a different agenda. They're stopping the triumph of an irredeemably evil worldview.
It's so powerful when you contrast this rigid, identity-driven system with the founders' non-ideological discourse. They knew factionalism was dangerous, but they didn't use ideology as the fix.
No, they were incredibly alert to the problem of factions. George Washington, in his farewell address, he warned against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally.
He wasn't worried that the parties had the wrong philosophy. He was worried that the spirit of party itself was an irrational tribal danger.
That's it. And James Madison, he sought structural solutions to this human frailty. He saw that parties are the natural product of reason and self-love. You can't eliminate them.
So you have to balance them.
You balance them through institutional design, separation of powers, federalism, checks and balances, all designed to harness human self-interest and slow down the passions of the moment. They relied on institutional friction, not ideological virtue.
So what changed? Why did this European framework supplant the structural American model?
Well, before the myth really solidified in the mid-20th century, principled people would actually leave their party when it abandoned their principles. Ronald Reagan is a great example.
He started out as a Democrat.
Voted for FDR. But when the Democratic Party abandoned the principles he valued, he left and became a Republican. The principle was stronger than the tribal identity.
But the essentialist illusion, this idea that your party represents an eternal good, it stopped that process.
It stopped rational dissent. Once people bought into the illusion, they became tied to the party despite radical platform changes. Tribal identity began to trump principle. And that really is the great tragic shift in American politics.
This is a devastating critique. So if the left-right spectrum is both inaccurate and harmful, what do Lewis and Lewis suggest we actually do about it?
They argue that we have to eliminate the bad model. Just like medicine improved when doctors finally abandoned the ancient theory of the four humors, politics can only improve when we abandon the essentialist spectrum.
So they have some practical steps. The first is to go granular.
Stop pretending political positions are naturally packaged together. Replace vague, meaningless labels like liberal or conservative with substantive, falsifiable terms.
So instead of saying someone is a far-right conservative,
you say they're a tax cut advocate or a deficit hawk or an abortion rights activist. Be specific.
And why does that specificity actually reduce hostility?
Because it aids in what's called cognitive decoupling. If you say, "I oppose your tax cut," you're debating a specific policy. But if you say, "I oppose your far-right conservative tax cut," you activate all the tribal baggage, all the associations. Granularity removes that inflammatory context.
And it forces you to debate the idea on its own merit.
Exactly. And it also improves political judgment because you can make specific, falsifiable predictions instead of vague ones.
Next, they propose we fundamentally change our speech to reflect this new reality.
Since ideological terms only really refer to tribes, we should use words that reflect that. Their proposal is simple. Either drop the terms entirely or preface them with tribe or team like Team Blue instead of the left.
And crucially, replace ideological labels with party labels, say Democrat or Republican.
Right. While party labels are still imprecise, they communicate membership in a tribe without perpetuating the lie that all the beliefs are philosophically unified. I am a Republican conveys membership in a group. I am a conservative conveys the fiction of a timeless essence.
Step 3 involves institutionalizing adversarial collaboration.
This is about fixing our echo chambers. Ideological homogeneity, whether in newsrooms or universities, kills critical thinking because confirmation bias runs wild. The remedy is to actively seek out dissent. They love the courtroom model,
where you're forced to argue both sides.
You institutionalize disagreement. By ensuring a strong pro and a strong con argument are always made, it forces everyone toward truth-seeking instead of just tribal victory. Politically diverse teams are just more accurate. They're better at spotting their own blind spots.
And finally, they offer a positive emotional alternative to this destructive tribalism. Find healthier tribes.
Humans are tribal. You can't switch that off. But ideological tribes are destructive. So the solution is to funnel that impulse into constructive directions. Family, service organizations, churches, local associations.
Communities that provide connection without the Manichaean political hostility.
Exactly. These non-ideological communities build real social capital and well-being. It's a plea to spend less time arguing over this fictional spectrum and more time building tangible local community bonds.
So when we pull back and synthesize this whole argument, the core distinction is just so clear and simple. Ideologies are not philosophical frameworks.
They are tribal uniforms. When you see a policy reversal, Republicans flipping on free trade, Democrats flipping on foreign intervention, you are not witnessing philosophical evolution.
You're just watching tribal activity.
The uniform is being redesigned by the leader, and the members conform to maintain their identity.
And the most dangerous logical consequence of all this is the conviction that our side is perfectly good and the other side is irredeemably evil.
That effective polarization, that hostility that's independent of any actual policy disagreement, is fueled entirely by this myth. The spectrum turns reasonable disagreement into this cosmic struggle, and it justifies extremism.
We're taught to be principled ideologues fighting for an essence.
When in reality, the author suggests we should strive to be humble rationalists, willing to correct error.
The argument really suggests that to save the Republic, we have to shift our focus from fighting for a political essence to prioritizing accuracy and humility. Because, as the saying goes, truth ultimately has a non-wing bias. The final question this deep dive leaves for you to ponder is, are you willing to prioritize accuracy and intellectual humility over the certainty and the comfort that comes with belonging to your political identity?
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to the deep dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shaped liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.